I wanted to start by asking you about who has the biggest sound, which is definitely, if I could say so, probably one of your more like maximalist, like sort of compositions as a whole, because you draw from so many different genres and influences in a polyaesthetic way. So, what is your approach to mixing different grooves together into one phenomenon? I know you mentioned in a note somewhere that you're very interested in writing about how different grooves come together to feel like one groove. Because, like, I was exploring that in my album as well, and I think a lot of what I came up with had to be arrived at by ear very meticulously. But I'm thinking perhaps you have some sort of you have some methods that govern your process because you're very thorough about that, and you know a lot about psychoacoustics.
I think for me there's two questions there. The first one about groove is tricky because I've approached it different ways. I'm probably relying more on my ear, but literally, yes, I will examine the pattern of, let's say, I love Afro-Cuban music.
Yes.
So I may take a conga part, and then but then I got a real striving for American funk music. Take some bass line, the pattern, the groove, and I'll put them together. Now, sometimes what I do also to bring it all together is I approach it from the reverse angle. The way I used to write Untel, who has the biggest sound, is basically I'd have polyrhythms, multiple tempos. So the same phrase, let's say, takes 6 bars at quarter note equals 100. I'll have the same phrase at quarter note equals 105, and it takes, it starts a little bit later, but they end together. So you've got, 10.5 against 10, 21 against 20, I guess, perfectly played. Each part's played differently. But then what I started doing in the last 15 years, because I started doing that way back in the late 70s, early 80s, because I got tired of the mechanistic feel of Western classical music. So let's have 40 tempos, polyrhythms. But then I found that even predictable, mechanistic at some level. So what I then do with that 21 against 20, which actually in the final mix becomes 10 lines. It's actually 29 against 28 against 27 against all the way down to 20, is I take each of those lines, even if they're audio recordings or MIDI parts, and I quantize it to a, quote, master groove. This is just terms I use in my studio. And that master groove might be something really basic, like just, because I love jazz. I was a jazz player originally. I love swing. Yeah. It's irrepressible. I just, things just sound cooler to me when they swing. Like, I love how Glenn Gould interprets Bach, because when you really sense his rhythm, the guy's swinging it, no more of this Bach, how do you call it? So metronomic. Like, I love when people do stuff like that. So anyway, I'll just take all those polyrhythms and I'll quantize it to a singular master groove, like a Afro-Cuban or a basic, 4/4 swing or something, and that made the polyrhythms dance much more. And I don't mean dance. I'm trying to get people up and dancing. I mean just lively singing. But the first part of your question, if I could address that, is about who has the biggest sound, because it's a bit of misleading to say that it's different genres of music put together in some postmodern way. This piece is, I think it's somewhat important to understand the background to it. In Who Has the Biggest Sound, okay, so this is about 2005. So I'm now almost pretty much 50 years old. Yes, I remember. I remember my first 50th birthday, and I was working on it because I played some people the first 2 minutes. And, I've been composing now full-time for 25 years, and I was beginning to feel about the redundancy of my gesture. Every composer, every artist has a style, and a lot one thing we don't talk enough about in music is a gesture. Like there's the free jazz gesture, there's the academic new music gesture, there's the polka gesture, the rock gesture. It's almost like dance to me, a certain movement, sense of sound. And I felt, I was tired of myself. I was having a musical midlife crisis.
Right.
And I felt I needed to, not become like a DJ where I mix other people's music, but I needed to, stop listening to whatever, Ligeti, Brahms, Bach, Balinese music. I seem to be stuck in the B's. You get my point. And just going, how can I combine all this? Is just go take a radical shift left. I'll parenthesize this because people will figure out I live in the country now in the Laurentians, in a log house in the forest, the whole third degree. When I wrote this piece, I was living in Montreal, which is a very urban city. It's very dense, polluted, very crowded. So it has nothing to do with urban-rural. An artist's intentions and the characteristic reality of their living conditions, I don't believe ever line up, or rarely. The person who has the most depressive life often writes the most happy music, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So anyways, I'm in the city, and I started analyzing nature sounds. Now, from the start, I did not want to do birds because, of course, that's a topic that's been touched on a lot by composers. And also, when you have bird sounds, they are very musical. For something else, since then, I've analyzed them, and they're like fast bebop lines. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, it's just unbelievable. This leads into what I was doing. I started analyzing most of us consider to be unmusical sounds, which is insects. And I was stunned as I started tearing it down. I mean, mainly through slowing down and analyzing the pattern. One of the most memorable ones for many people in who has the biggest sound is the use of crickets. Because what I found in crickets was essentially a lot of Spanish rhythms. I mean, different types of, all those, God, my mind's gone blank. All those different sort of Spanish beats, with the maracas and whatnot. They're often in 6/8 or 3.
Is that like the beat that you, the 6/8 beat that you mentioned in the Untempered orchestra score at the beginning?
No. This isn't who has the biggest sound. And I mapped out the rhythm, and what I found is the crickets were doing a lot of Latin Spanish rhythms. And of course, crickets occur in more arid, dry places. Like if you've been in the countryside of Spain, it is screaming with the sound of cricket. And then what I would do is they sing, of course, incredibly high pitched, and I time stretched it. Now they only make a sound maybe over 100 or 200 cents, but if you then logarithmically increase that
right
of 100 or 200 cents to an octave or 2 octaves, the normal melodic range that we use on voice or most instruments, is you got these melodies that were often very kind of like Latin music too. So then I went on to animals like cows, pigs, howling dogs, and of course I started getting the vernacular slang, if I can call it, morphology, whatever vocabulary usage you like, of country and western music. And it just went on. So what I was doing in Who Has the Biggest Sound is exactly what I wanted to be doing, is not falling back on myself to decide the way the music was flowing, but following something else. And of course, what I found was that most of the musics we already know. I only went so far in Who Has the Biggest Sound, but I think I can absolutely say that most of the musics we have stylistically, morphologically, syntactically, come from nature. And we're not really creating that much. We're mimicking nature in our music. And of course, this was also, now by the time I'm done the piece, 54 or something. By this time, I'm feeling, like, okay, maybe I'm really not that creative. I was humiliated by nature. Now, of course, what I did in the piece is I turned it into this silly story. Who has the biggest sounds with all these funny subtitles? Who can play the fastest, man or cricket? And all these things. As I'm throwing out these questions, who can talk faster, crickets or man? Who has the nicest melodies? Who has, and you hear these dogs howling in my cello playing, and all these things is like, as I'm questioning, what are we doing? We're just doing patterns that we're hearing all the time. I think originally most musics arise out of, how would you call this, a archetype of nature sounds. So the piece is really about a celebration of nature. And it's not, an ecological piece for our dying planet. It's about, listen to this joyful patterns that are in nature. I'm also playing one of the compositional tensions for me, the playful aspect in the composition was what I named for myself human speed versus insect speed, and going in between.
Oh, yes. That's why you have those changing meters so much, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I actually thought that the Untempered Orchestra was part of Who Has the Biggest Sound at the ending part. Is that incorrect, or is that...
No.
You consider those separate compositions, then?
Yes. I hope they sound like it. Yeah. No. Who Has the Biggest Sound ends with our narrator, who's also a person I know well, asking those last questions. And that's me coming to the end of the piece and going, and what about who has the most complex music? And who has, and it trails off. Of course, I add this thing of cars going by. I mean, the voice is like going through Doppler shift and fading away. There's still more questions to ask, because I feel I only started on a very rich terrain of research and thinking about the relationship between music and sound, music and nature in a whole new way. But I realized, this is wonderful, but I got to move on. I have other music ideas that may not at all relate to nature.
Did you draw inspiration from natural sounds in any of your other works other than Who Has the Biggest Sound? Or was Who Has the Biggest Sound kind of the debut of this line of thinking?
Yeah, it is. And what I do with all my these large-scale studio works, we used to call them tape works, some people call them electroacoustic works, that is, Who Has the Biggest Sound, Vitesse, Below the Walls and the Other Walls works, Veils, and Music of Another Present Era, is what, because they... I think Who Has the Biggest Sound was 4 years of full-time work.
Wow.
I'm also, I'm Liberace is like a year to 2 years easy. I'd have to look in the score again, and I'm talking full-time work. I've been a full-time composer. But what I do with these large-scale studio works is, of course, I'm accepting commissions for what I call concert works, or what's in my field called mix works. That is, works for instruments, and in my case, pre-recorded tape, either soloists or a small ensemble. So I take parts of this work, in this case, Who Has the Biggest Sound, and I think for that there was Stefan, the Swedish guitarist, I wrote Who Has the Biggest Noise, electric guitar tape. And there was for the Swiss ensemble, I had two commissions with them. I know you're familiar with the other one. But there's also another one I did way back in about 2010. And it's called Who Has the Nicest Melodies? So they're actually doing some of the cricket work and the Spanish rhythms with, I think that was for 10 instruments and tape. Oh, yeah, who can play the fastest? I forgot about that, because I actually, unfortunately, never heard that piece, so it's been played a few times. It was commissioned by the Stockholm Sax Quartet. Yeah, so there's a sax quartet. That piece I'd really like to hear. 2007. Who has the biggest noise for electric guitar tape? And who has the biggest sound, the one we're talking about? Who has the strangest melody? 9 wind and brass brass instruments. That was the Swiss Chamber Orchestra. Yes, that Phoenix, that are truly, truly amazing musicians, and they can. Oh my God, gee, that guy's scary. You never wanted him for a piano teacher.
Right, yeah. So
I never had a piano teacher, but the stories are infamous.
Wow, this is incredible.
Anyway.
So then the way that Who Has the Biggest Sound is constructed, the way I was reading into it, it's like you're a composer who, sometimes is called electroacoustic, although that might not be entirely accurate. But yeah. you're taking only the sounds of acoustic instruments, and you're electronically manipulating them. And so the ensembles who are playing in Who Has the Biggest Sound are like actual ensembles that have commissioned you to put them in it or to write something for them, and not just like single individuals who you've contacted.
I mean, obviously, when it's live performers, I'm not giving them parts that are anything like the studio work. There's no 30 notes per second. Yeah, you can write that, but no one's ever going to play it. Right. I actually tend to write, so the pieces vary, but I try, because I can do such idealized performances in my studio work by time compressing stuff, pitch shifting, whatever processes I've used throughout my studio career. When I write for live performers, most of the time I tend to be quite generous. I write very idiomatically. There are a lot of fast passages, but the performers usually all say the same thing. I got this part, and I looked at it, oh my God. And then I started playing it, and it's like, oh, okay, I can do this, And of course, that just comes down to any composer's responsibility of studying fingering and, listening to the works, the instruments in quote normal music,
right.
A lot, which I do.
So when you give parts to those ensembles, then is any of it microtonal? Like, are you giving them microtonal notation with cent deviations, or are you giving them things in 12-tone equal temperament and then manipulating the tuning in the studio later? Or is it a mixture?
No, both. Actually, if I can flog my Bandcamp page.
Please do.
I only have 4 works up, but the one of them is called Shaynamic Sunshine, and it's the latest commission, just a couple years old, from the Swiss ensemble, Phoenix again. And I really like this people, and actually I noticed of the 4 works so far, it's the one most played on my Bandcamp, but so it's my hit tune. And it's for 8 instruments in tape. And I have just the first page of the score there on my Bandcamp page for the cover art. I don't know what to do with cover art. Everyone has monsters and waterfalls, so I just put a page from the score. So my Bandcamp page I look like the White Album of new music. It's kind of weird. I go to other people's Bandcamp and it's like eye candy. I go to mine, it's like, oh God, I look like a severe Catholic Jesuit monk.
But that's your own aesthetic, so that's okay. It's like there's lots of people who have that vibe where their cover art is very minimal, and your scores also look really impressive with all the microtonal deviations. So I think a lot of people like that. It's kind of like Score Follower.
Yeah, because if you look at it, that one page, you can see I use a very simple notation. There's all the work done by Ben Johnson, other people, how to write for Western classically trained performers and microtonality, and I can't even get through half their notation. I don't mean to be critical, but I've heard from too many performers just reading ratios doesn't work for them. You can't, that's for composers to discuss. But anyway, so I literally just will have a C note, and I'll have below it minus 35. That means C note minus 35 cents, and then the next note might be D note, and it'll be a 10 above it. That means D note 10 cents sharp.
Yeah.
Now, in the beginning of the score, I say, look, I'm reducing this to cents, 100th of a semitone. If I bravos already, 10 cents. On average. We won't talk about opera stars. I've heard vibratos that I swear go out to a whole tone. Is that C or C sharp there, honey? Yeah, that to me is obnoxious. But anyways, we won't get into opera. The interview will go sideways. And so, of course, I create a MIDI part. So I find classical musicians, Western classical musicians, all have incredible ears. And in new music, it's phenomenal technique. They are actually able to play this, including relatively fast passages with all the microtonal stuff intact. I mean, this last one, I just go, oh, this is why I don't call myself a performer anymore. I would not want to get this thing in the mail. But, they pulled it off, like, perfectly. I couldn't tell. In fact, they were auto-correcting themselves, talking about, because in that piece, it's based on the superimposition of two different harmonic theories, so technically it's just, but not really. But there's all these different, they broke it down. I was sitting in the rehearsal, and they broke it down. No, that's like the mean tone third blah. I mean, they're Europeans, I don't understand all the German either. But some of those words are the same, all music languages, but that's the third of this mean tone system. It's like, the musician was helping another, and I thought, oh God, oh my God. They're analyzing my music in terms of the different sizes of thirds, way more than I thought about. I'm just going for the sound. So, but anyways, so there are these musicians in David Brody, and David wanted a piece for Contra. He had just recently designed a brand new type of contrabass saxophone. And a contrabass saxophone bass sax is somewhat in the jazz idiom. This goes down yet another six. It goes down to the low C of piano, and you could push it a bit, but not microtonally. But half that work is microtonal. Now, just the thought of blowing through, 30 feet of tubing, and top, making a 10-cent sharp, just sends me into the night screaming. At the thought. But, that recording called Metallic Midnight in Morocco is actually the first piece on Bandcamp. And he plays it like, I could put it up against my MIDI version, which was, of course, performed on a sounding MIDI baritone sax, so they're an octave apart, and they line up. There's hardly any beating. Like, what the heck, man? I mean, and he plays it gracefully. Beautifully. The legato phrasing is he sings, and the last part's very percussive, which is in 12-tone. And he's slap tonguing the out of his horn. So these guys are out there. They can do this stuff. We don't have to keep it to synthesize.
The really exciting thing about this is the way you're talking about how these performers can perform microtonally fits in line what I've been thinking for a while. I know that I can sing microtonally, and I've done that for maybe about 5 years.
Yes, I watched your videos. I want to get you behind my microphones up here in Quebec sometime, please.
Oh, yes.
My God, you're so accurate. Holy Jesus, you scared the shit out of me.
Oh my God, absolutely. I'd love to. It goes against what Easley Blackwood would think about this. When I talked to him, he mentioned that he was quite sure that performers would never be able to comprehend such structures, but I think your structures might be significantly more complex than what he was working with, which was equal temperaments, and he was using them in a tonal way.
20th century music, the language of it, has gone through so many turning ins and outs, from complete dissonance to complete consonance and all the rhythmic developments and structural. We tend to think, wow, we've just grown this language so quickly. Look at those romantics, sunk into the same music for over 100 years, and they all, oh my God, they did Gregorian chant for 10,000 years, I get the feeling sometimes. But, I think the real development that might be remembered from the last century, which is more my century than yours, I guess, is the development of instrumental technique. When you read that the bassoon player for the premiere for the spring couldn't play that high, and Stravinsky actually wrote that high bassoon part, which is just above middle C,
right?
In order to get a folkloric, out-of-tune, raunchy opening.
Yeah.
And there's Igor in the 1950s hearing your modern bassoon player play it like he's playing 12-bar blues effortlessly, perfectly in tune, perfect classical tone. He's like, what? And, that rite of spring opening on bassoon, I'm sure is, an entrance exam now to get into first-year bassoon playing. it seems as though the instrumental people took at face value. They went with that. So now, yeah, you can get what I would like to think is rhythmically complex music like Dolden with the microtonality. Let's say back to my latest Phoenix piece, and even the one I did for them 10 years ago was microtonal. I think, like you and our mutual friends, we believe that the next stage in music does involve some form of microtonality, because, you know, you see the inklings every so often in popular electronic music, and I always thought that, like, you know, blues and jazz, you know, sometimes there's real wonderful pitch wonkiness going on, and you know, my first love was blues guitar, so I played. So, you know, I mean,
yeah.
What B.B. King or Hendrix or whoever you want to talk about your fave is can do with 5 notes is just, oh my God,
yeah.
You know, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Take Me to Your Captain. You know, who was I listening to the other day? It's just, oh, Roy Buchanan. I was just like, oh my God. I mean, what he does with 5 notes in that Telecaster is like, still makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and just like, wow. And, you know, just bending and doing things, you know, so it's like it's always kind of just there. You know, we got to get rid of the piano, though, in that training, and that might help, but that's another issue.
Yeah, it's interesting to observe the differences in music that makes use of microtones that doesn't systematically try to use another tuning system that isn't 12-tone equal temperament, and music that starts from a place of, okay, we have to break out of the tuning system that most of the music around us is in. Jude Thomas and I were talking about the differences between those kinds of music on his podcast episode. I see that in the Untempered Orchestra, you have a very systematic approach to how you are changing the tuning. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were in that piece, you were changing the size of the semitone that generates all of the intervals, right? So you were changing it from like 99 cents to like maybe like 98, 97, and then going the other way and going to like 100, 102, 104, 105. Is that how you were?
I mean, yes, as you know, this is what we call stretch tuning. There are some sections in which I start like in 12-tone equal temperament, and I use that increasing stretch tuning that you just described in order to get at, to me, what is the meat of the composition, and that is these non-octave tuning system. For example, when you get to, like, I have in my score here, E4, Z4, I take 10 to 7, which is 617 cents.
For our listeners.
Are we going to have this religious conversation? I'm looking at the things that I've created here. So that means you only get to, so let's say middle C, and the next note is 231 cents up, and then I divided 38 cents, 38 cents, 77 cents, 115, and 115. The next note where that pattern starts again ends up on F sharp, 17 cents, and then we go 231 cents, 38, 38, 77, 115, 115, and then we end up on C, the next C up, which is now 34 cents sharp, and we start again, 231, 38, 38, 77. So basically the C we started on, we never see again. Oh my God. Ding. Do I win the candy now?
Yes.
And so there's about 10 of these sort of what I call, well, because they are non-octave tuning systems. So one of the writing, that piece is very much me in my head writing, is I start with 12-tone equal temperament, and to quote, I mean, this is the only way I can think of it in my studio when I'm working, is to make it weirder and weirder to get into such a tuning system as I just described, is I first do, this fairly quick transition through these stretch tunings, and then I had worked it out just through using my ear, which of these non-octave tuning systems to go into next. And once I had gotten, to that point with the ear, I found I could switch around, I was following some musical pattern. Actually, in anticipation of this interview, I don't normally listen to my own music, but I listened to that one the other day, and I thought it was very musical. The flow, the tuning system is changing. I know, because I remember doing it. It was a lot of work. Like every, I can't even remember, like maybe every, in real time, 10 or 20 seconds, but it just flows. I didn't go, oh, there's a new tuning system, plus a new harmony. Of course, because often what I was doing is the same harmony or the same melody. I had about 4 melodies I decided on was the work, and I'm just moving them through a different tuning system. And sometimes in the middle of the melodic shape, I change the tuning system. Because you've already been hearing the melody over and over again, unbelievably. And part of my feeling for this was that, I remember, Stephen, I started way back in the modernist textural work of the 80s, wall, cycle, veils, and I started feeling a lack of movement ever in constantly dissonant or even completely just pretty beatless music, just this stasis. And we live in such exciting time that I wanted to create the sense of harmonic movement that, a Brahms or a Beethoven or a Bach, they would have experienced that very excitedly. Wow, look at me, I'm going from the key of C to the key of E. Whoa, what a weird move, rather than going to G or F. And now I'm going to A flat. Whoa. We hear that stuff now like it's called a jazz standard. We have a cocktail to it and go, oh, God, Diana Krall's boring. Have you got something else?
Right, yeah.
So I wanted to create the sense of movement I'm interested in the microtonality, for sure. I want a new way of expressing things, but I'm not willing to throw out everything Western. We don't all have to be post-World War II. I hate Western culture, all that modern music of the 50s and 60s. So much to me is post-DACO. I hate myself, and I hate Western music. And I'm sorry. I grew up on the West Coast, playing rock and roll and jazz and smoking and drinking and having fun. I'm not obviously my parents are European, and I come from that line, but I don't live in that world. I never felt that angst. I'm sorry. I just can't. I read about it. Great films, great novels, some really good music, but it's not me. So I love movement in art, and especially in music. It's so precious because we work in time in music. We are, the other arts. Painting, sculpture. They envy us because we work in time and we manipulate the perception of time. It's just. And we ended it so quickly in the latter part of the 20th century because there's still movement in Stravinsky or Bartók. Lots of movement. A lot more through rhythm, I suppose, in their case. But harmonically, too. I was listening to Stravinsky the other day, and his 12-tone works. And I thought, God, he makes his stuff move in a way that Weber never could for me. Anyways, I'm interested in the movement through, and I'm using tuning to create that sense of, whoa, look at that, or here's this. You've been listening to the same harmony, but it's being expressed in a whole new tuning system. Just like, hey, we're listening to this melody that Brahms wrote, he's in C, and now we hear it in E. That would have been a similar effect, I think,
Well, I had the idea that you were using for the Untempered Orchestra, but I didn't want to use it in the same way that you're using it at all. I love the way that you're using it. On my album, I wanted to have a piece that where the tuning system title was just 12-tone equal temperament. But then, since it's not specified what the octave is of the equal temperament, the octave can just be any size. So I would just be stretching the octave around, and I wanted to have, an accompanying graphic.
Yes. Well, there's two things, Stephen. One is, what I found with the stretching where, I'm collapsing my octave down in that one example to an augmented fifth, is I found if you had strong identifying, I'm just speaking from my own work and my own experience, and I talk about this in the beginning of the score, which I read this morning at breakfast in anticipation this might come up, is I was surprised when I did this because I was hoping to kind of obliterate meaning, and I guess that's the old modernist in me. But I found if you had strong identifying melodic curve, which I had from the beginning of the piece, even when it was more narrow, going from an octave down to, let's say, an augmented fifth is the range of the octave now, is one still perceived the curve. And I talked about this in the beginning of the score for the Untempered Orchestra. I call it melodic gesture. Because, and I compare it to when people sing Happy Birthday together. Everybody has a very strong sense of their own third and whole tone. And fifth, especially when you're singing Rages, the third is fascinating. But we can all sing Happy Birthday together. Like, we get the melodic curve and we can do it. So there seems to be something very generous about the ear in terms of, let's just call what we're talking about, the stretching factor. But I want to say something more important in reference to what you bring up, because I'm still interested in a unique sound world, which for me for 40 years has been multi-tracking. I mean, all my works are minimally several hundred tracks. So I'm always producing large harmonies in order to accommodate all those voices. Therefore, my approach to microtonality is I explored initially in a singular melodic manner, maybe, but starting, I think, really the last 15 years, I just first explored harmonically. Okay, so, this harmony spread over 5 octaves in this tuning. Change to this tuning. Is that going to work? Okay, maybe change the harmony. So when I change the tuning, it sounds musical to my ears, and I'm the composer, so sorry, it's my aesthetic decision. I mean, that's why you're paying me, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to, do a science test. Hey, does this sound better, or this harmony, going from this tuning to this tuning? Boy, could you imagine that research? Yay. When does it sound like Keith Richards? Anyway, so the thing is, I'm always exploring mass sound, like big sound. So my tuning concepts start from that point. I'm doing a multi-track piece. I'm not doing perfect intonation of thirds on this lovely Hindu melody. I mean, that's not that I'm reinterpreting. I'm not doing any of that kind of work. And I'm not interested in pretending that I'm recreating some just intonation paths from, medieval English churches or Greek society. I mean, all that stuff's really fascinating. But to me, yes, it's a musical interest, but it does not get me out of bed.
It's kind of like a musical magnet for lots of microtonalists, and so then it almost becomes a bit of a microtonal cliche, at least to me. So I'm like, at least I'm always asking the question, what can I do that nobody else has done? Which is a bit of an adolescent question, like who has the biggest sound, but it's like almost a sincere motivator, really.
Yeah. I mean, almost everything I do is this way, and all I've done is change, the type of aesthetic and style. But all my tuning decisions, intonation decisions, and other things, and even the melodic and harmonic and rhythmic work is because I'm imagining what it will be in the end. I used to have musicians tune their instruments, which was really until until 2005, because now there's technology that does that transparently. But I mean, that was the only work they had to do, and I made it really easy. Like, I had everything at 25 cents sharp. So for most players, that's just jamming the reed in further. I didn't go all over the map, and I had them do the minus 10 cent part separately. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, it was a nightmare. I mean, that's one reason why I didn't write microtonally between about 92 and 2005. I just couldn't stand it. I had I've been working like a dog for 20 years, and I had 5 works.
So much work, yeah.
Fish. I got to get some repertoire. I'm never going to get any respect, man.
Exactly. I wanted to ask you what your workflow is like for putting together one of these pieces, because you are ornamenting them with so much detail, and often there might be so many different sounds at a time, like those big giant chords like from Veils, and how do you say this other one? Le Reste de la Vitesse?
Oh, yeah, it's French, and I'm not very good. We can call it intoxication by speed. I always try to reference the... It's actually very poetic in French, Le Reste de la Vitesse, and I don't even say it that well. Yes, workflow is very important for me, and it hasn't changed much since... it hasn't changed since 1980. It's just, I just get up and I put on my hard hat and I get my coal axe out. I'm off. Okay, so first of all, I usually do some research, like what we were just talking about. Like, what does this large harmony sound like? That's always very tricky. I remember when I was younger, having a small portable organ, which I would just tape notes down. I have no keyboard scale, and then use my fingers. Well, I grew up being a guitarist and then a string player, so, quite monophonic instruments for large-scale harmonic thought. And then with the microtonal stuff, I don't know how I ever did it. Like, even when I think back to Bales, I looked at it because you were looking at it, and I thought, how did I do this? I mean, how did I know these harmonies? I somehow, I don't know. I don't think I have that great ears, but, I mean, I watch your videos. You have amazing ears, but I don't know, a sensibility, I guess. I don't know, but I can't explain that. But I first write the score. I do a little bit of research, I call it training my ear in my own way. I never had ear training. Just familiarizing myself with the materials, whether it's the insects of who has the biggest sounds, or it's the non-octave tunings of the Untempered Orchestra. Just, okay, what is this? Where is this piece going? And I also try to develop, I often have the title, actually, those poetic titles. I feel it's very important for artists to have a narrative. It's hard to talk about music in words always. But what is the story I'm telling? I just get that. It changes, it evolves as I start writing the piece. So then I have my score that, as I discussed, you can see at electrocd.com. And then of course, write out the parts for the performers. I perform a lot of parts myself. Mm-hmm. And I just record everything. And then becomes maybe things, like I have my own personal score, but what you see is what I ended up doing. Because once everything's together, then I go, I will say my most proudest thing in life is that that's really not working moment, which I suppose a lot of your young listeners often feel. Mm-hmm. Were very numerous in my 20s, still occurred in my 30s, very rarely in my 40s, and in my 50s and into my 60s. It's been a while since I've had one of those moments, so Right. This is good. I'm getting closer between my predictive knowledge and the final sound product. And that, to me, is really good. That's why I think my late works, the works of the last 15 years, I think are really, I like to think they're mature. I hope they're mature, because I feel that it's what exactly I heard. So I'm very much into the quality of sound, and I think my early work suffered at the recording level because I wasn't working with the best mics. And it's been that's also why the constant remastering, is I can't adjust the original recordings, but, we can do a lot of mastering and remixing with the new everything, compressions, EQs, and also just the control we have now. Remember, until 2000, all those monster mixes, I was doing in real time on an analog board, like literally to mix something like Veils or any of the Walls pieces or In the Natural, all those, or even Libra its first iterations, is I'd sit at a board and I would practice the mix for days on end, like even a week or two, and then today's it. Set up the master machine you're recording to, hit record, super high on 3 coffees, and go, okay, I'm going to nail it. This is
yes.
it. Because my hands are flying constantly. Some people watch me then. Just turn the CQ on here, put it in. Now, adjust it for this section. The faders are constantly moving. You having to do it all manually. And then, of course, 15-minute work, and you slip up one really bad fader move at 13 minutes.
Yeah.
No editing, right?
Yeah, it's so tough to do that. So what speakers and microphones and DAW do you use in the production of your own high-quality music?
Yes, okay. So I, to even narrow that commentary further, is a lot of what are called studio-grade speakers I don't really believe in. They're very neutral. I find they don't have really deep bass, and they don't have super high-end. I mean, this kind of tannoy studio monitors. And I find people that have big sound systems or really good headphones is another thing now, and I could talk about that too, is they have full range. And why not, when we're mixing and mastering, we have full range. So the sound that I love the most, and it's partly because I grew up with the headphones, is electrostatic. These are not regular speakers. I'll let your listeners look that up if they don't know. Electrostatic's a totally different technology. So I have a pair of electrostatic speakers that are about 5 feet tall, made by I've been using for microphones is, of course, we all want a 251 and our original U67. The old mics are still just such a beautiful sound. Is there are these companies, they're basically engineers who worked for 9 or 8 kg as technicians and then quit. And I don't quite fully understand. I read something because I follow audio blogs, I'm such a geek, is something about patents being released where they can reverse engineer like a 251, a U87, U67, and sell it. I think right now a U67 from 1965 is $25,000. I'm never going to afford that. But the company I went with is Peluso, Peluso. And I bought his quote. He has different model numbers. It doesn't matter. I bought his knockoff of U87, which he has it's called, I don't know, 87A or something. I don't even remember. And his knockoff of his Lamb 251, which is really just such a beautiful treble on it without ever being sibilant somehow. How did they do that back then? Well, of course, they were recording to brutal, tape, that just was killing the top end. So, it's part of the explanation for me. And that is my main go-to. Headphones, I've always used the electrostatic headphones for mixing. I mix under headphones, and I check on speakers, and I still mix on headphones. And I've always worked with Stax headphones, and they are still very good. But, I'm 64, and, Stax has got all that, stuff you can't. They're not portable. They have a box you got to plug into because it has to be stepped up because it's electrostatic. So I've really gotten over in the last 5 years into planar headphones. And for the money, I'm sorry, I guess sounds like I'm getting product endorsement. I'm really not trying. They're like 2,000 Canadian, so I guess they're 1,500 roughly American. Hi-Fi, man. Wow. And what's interesting about these planar headphones are halfway between normal and electrostatic. Electrostatic are still primo headphones. And I sometimes still check. The Hi-Fi Man Aria, okay, it is Aria, A-R-Y-A. What's also really stunning about these, so the problem with electrostatics is bass. And so my electrostatic speakers each have a bass bit. You can't have a bass bit on headphones. So electrostatic headphones, even the really good ones by Stax, I found I was still boosting the bass on my monitor to the headphones, which is not good. The planar headphones have bass well covered. You put on especially, techno dance music, it's like, holy shit, I think my heart's going to get confused here. My whole body feels like it's moving. But what's the top end, it's so beautiful. But there's also what I was really struck by the Aria is the spatial thing, representing how we hear music on speakers under headphones is always a tricky business. Both these and the Stax electrostatics, the way they do it is they're very big on your ears, so they are including all your pin-eye reflections. But this is another level up, because for the first time on headphones, on a very good recording, huge caveat, is I feel I can really experience the vertical dimension.
Right.
It sounds like the flute player is standing and the cello player is sitting. You know what I mean? That kind of spatialization, not that the flute player's on my left and the cello player is more on the right, but I get the sense of the vertical, which is, it's like, whoa. in a room. It's all obliterated by the room sound. The other nice thing about electrostatic speakers is, I mean, good ones like this, Martin Rogan, is the sweet spot is everywhere in the studio. Not that I really have clients. I work on my own, but if I do have a small drinking party, I mean, everyone's getting a great sound everywhere in the room because that's one of the beauties is the electrostatics. And even behind the speaker, it sounds great. You know, I step behind big studio speakers, like, oh, gross.
Right.
So, you know, because that's always a problem with studios. Who has the sweet spot? Oh, and you're trying to work on a mix with someone. It's like, you know. That's where I switched to headphones. I used to have 2 pairs of electrostatic headphones. Okay, put these on. Great. Because, of course, you're always dealing with soloists, and they always want themselves louder with more reverb. So I'm a very specialized because I'm very much of an audiophile. So my studio gear, not the mic preamp and the microphones, but the other stuff is more audiophile grade. Not, I don't have all tech lenses, and you know, like, you know, fueled by this huge block of power that's really made for AC/DC concerts. You know, I mean, no, none of that. I mean, because no one hears that anyways. I mean, and I prefer the sound of audiophile here. It's so lush, and it's so transparent between the high, mids, and lows. It's like you listen to some of these studio monitors that are, you know, bi-amped and all that. It's like, I can tell exactly almost where the crossover is. Okay, fine. Look up electrostatics because it's not a speaker. It's not a moving coil, so it gets rid of all the distortions. It's a huge ribbon. Like my speakers, there's a 4-foot-long singular membrane that moves singularly. So it gets rid of hysteresis distortion, because when you start reading about crossovers and speakers being out of phase and the hysteresis distortion, you go, am I ever going to use this as a reference? Oh, yeah, no, I can, like, you know, when I'm doing mastering jobs, I do a lot of mastering jobs for other people, is I can so pinpoint clearly, you know, if an edit has a click or EQ, you know, the ring on, the tail on a compression, everything is so clear, but that's why some people don't like them, because, you know, rocker-type ears prefer the more, they like that distortion in their speakers. So it's hyper clear, most, like, all the gear I own.
So are you almost always doubling instruments in texture like you mentioned, since you have so many tracks?
No, I've actually kind of pulled away from that.
Okay.
No, I think I'm too influenced by the Western Orchestra, where the minimal we have is doublings, and often 4 of each wind, and of course the strings. I think we're also seduced by that sound. It's hard to get away. No, a lot of the work, I'm just trying to think under... No, actually, to tell you the truth, Stephen, I'm mixing it up. I find sometimes having, of course, the other thing that has really gotten into the repertoire of my timbres, my color palette, whatever you want to call it, is world instruments. So I will, like, in Untempered and in Who Has and the work since, I'll often create a string sound, but it'll be 20 different violins, like, you know, Middle Eastern, Indian, you know, string instruments, we should call them. Arco string instruments. You know, the Chinese ones that are one string, you know, Yiru.
Yeah.
Excuse me, these sort of instruments with the Western violin. Like, they might all be playing the same part, but, you know, of course, the entire resonance structure of the different bodies, in the case of Yiru, not much, but has a certain sound, and plus, you know, the very, to our ears, defined resonant peaks of the violin body. I find that to be a really, if I'm going for the string orchestra, I mean, let's say an ensemble flutes, violins, that could be more interesting. And I try to do the same with rather than having, you know, taking C flute, and just recording the same person 10 times at a different pitch level, is having, you know, that, and there's tons of flutes. Flutes are in every culture. Flutes, I mean, you know what I mean. I mean, open embouchure blowing.
Right.
And that to me is so I'm doing it more, I guess I'm approaching sectional writing from that. Not always, but a lot. And I find that nice, because that's also where having all that high-end clear gear, it's not that I'm trying to get you to hear the difference between an Irish whistle and our flute, but as much as I'm allowing your ear into, because they're playing the same thing, into distinguishing that, oh, that's an interesting flute doubling.
Yeah, right.
One person's drunk on Irish beer. No.
Well, the way you put things together kind of reminds me of how a sound designer was talking about putting things together at Ball State, where, like, he did one of the roars for Jurassic Park Dinosaur, and he was talking about all of the different sounds that he layered in that one thing, like even having, like, a little, like, baby elephant sound at the end. You know, crazy.
I was going to say, well, yes, of course, what I'm saying is not at all radical for people in the movie or commercial music industry. And I'll just use what you said as a launch pad for another general commentary. Of course, as part of my general research into audio production and commercial production, I think there almost becomes this Catholicism of never picking up a commercial audio engineering magazine. Certainly when I sit through some electroacoustic concerts, I wonder if these people even contemplate that they're producing a recording. But that's another topic. The French Canadians here are really good at it. They produce. I was listening to some Gilles Gobard the other day. Man, what a sound. But there's always been this aversion, and also like recording, even recording their string quartet or whatever, is just these horrible, dull, gray recordings with no post-production. And people are buying the soundtrack for Jurassic Park or the new, whoever, the latest female singer is. It's all big, post-Madonna. I'm showing my age. And it's because, I put those recordings on. They sound really good.
Right, yeah.
And I love watching Hollywood films for the production values. And all the experimental filmmakers have caught on. We watch mainly arty experimental film on Criterion stuff, and they're well produced now. But then you get to like arty music, and a lot of it's still like, I've heard come out of people's mouths. Oh, don't use compression, no EQ, just my sound.
Oh no!
Yeah, but your sound is going through a transduction process. Like that's like saying, let's say they're not good looking, or they're not going to say, do you really want me not to Photoshop this publicity photo? No, okay, I'm being mean now. You know what I mean? We have these tools. We have these technologies. Use them, You can still play your string quartet in this magical way, but if I'm going to listen to it on, as I like to call it, shoeboxes with flopping paper speakers, I wouldn't mind a little of the signal so that it sounds good where I end up hearing it, because I'm not at your concert hall, and I'm not sitting in the front row,
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to ask you some more about who has the biggest sound. Well, there were two more things I wanted to go over with you, or maybe three.
Sure.
One of them was, in Who Has the Biggest Sound, I'm wondering how you approach mixing or mixing microtonal sort of ether sounds into your otherwise kind of straightforward tracks. I'm thinking about things like the Saddle Song, where, it's clearly maybe a song you could hear on the radio, but there are certain parts of it where there's like a microtonal edge to it, and it's very hard to place. I was recently looking at a mixing video that talked about sort of like 6 levels of volume, where like you have the things that are really out front, you have the things that are sort of foreground and background, and then you have things like subliminal sounds, which you might not even necessarily hear as discrete things in the mix, but they're affecting it in some very subtle way. So I'm thinking that these microtonal sounds in the more song-like parts of Who Has the Biggest Sound are subliminal in some way. I don't know if you can speak to that at all, or if that is something you were interested in.
Actually, that's answer kind of branches off into two different thoughts. The first one, because I just talked about engineering. Let me stick more with the musical. This goes back to what I was talking about 15 minutes ago, that you have to remember that I'm always contemplating a tuning, an arrangement of instruments, whatever, all that stuff. My musical decisions, choice making, based on that I'm going to be producing this larger sound. So, in short, to answer your question, like the Saddle Song or any of my other musics, there is not layering of microtonal stuff with 12-tone ET. It's only one or the other.
I see.
And what's going on, I think why you're having, and I actually love that, what you're describing, although you're trying to analyze it with based on perhaps a mixing video you watched, that I'm feeding it through subtleties of layers of mixing, like sort of a should carry in background, mid-ground, foreground. No, not at all. I generally only use one tuning at a time. It only lasts for a few months. But the Saddle Song in specific, I'm often shocked at how normal it sounds. And there does seem to be something about, even though it may be a really weird, like that non-on tuning system I rattled off a while ago, you can think, wow, man, it's going to sound really, really weird. And it's also my tendency towards lush orchestration, I think, and smooth gesture softens the blow. I do find a lot of microtonal music does feel didactic. It does feel like, listen to these intervals. It's kind of like, oh, God, I feel like I'm in the air training class. Stop.
Right.
Turn this into music. Orchestrate it. Like, create a dream. Like I say, create a narrative for me. But the Saddle Song Who Has the Biggest Sound is a weird piece, because at one level it's so brash, I mean, right from the opening, and so on your face, but its musical meanings and all these other things we could talk about are actually a very subtle way of listening. Because what I was going to say is the sense that you have of familiar and unfamiliar at the same time in movements like the Saddle Song is because that's one of those movements based on barnyard animals.
What do you think about people calling you, like, a polyaesthetic composer? Do you agree with that? In listening to your works, I'm struck by how many different textures and areas you cover, but also how each piece seems to have its own character. I think that when I listen to Veils, I kind of get, since the tempo and the way that the spectral sounds unfold is, like, kind of slow, it's almost like meditative music or drone music, where it's not necessarily relaxing, but the fact that you get to lean into the sound and really, like, kind of just be there for an extended period of time, gives it, I don't know, some sort of, like, weird, like, dissonant stillness. And then Who Has the Biggest Sound is all about, like, this flurry of activity and, like, really cool, like, electroacoustic moments of sounds interacting with each other, intermingling with, like, other grooves and things like that. But yeah, I mean, what do you think about people calling you a polyaesthetic composer? Is that a term that you would disagree with?
Well, to break that down, I would put it more that, okay, I have a friend, and the way he expresses it is a better way to me. And Oscar Peterson talked like this too. I don't know, maybe he stole the phrase from me. He said, how many tools do you have in your toolbox? Because, I mean, just personally as a musician, first I was a blues and rock guitar, I was a jazz guitar, and my very early electroacoustic composition sounded like an electroacoustic composer, and then I wrote some chamber music, and then I played jazz again, and I even, because I grew up in Vancouver, I live in the East now, but I grew up in Vancouver. Vancouver in the 60s and 70s, well, still, is incredibly multicultural. Even when I was a boy, it was 40% Asian. So I had time to play in a gamelan orchestra. I like to tell people, and it's true, I got my first good electric guitar, that's Paul Dolden and I, sitar. No, I got my first guitar and tape recorder when I was 8. I got my first good guitar, sitar, and a better tape recorder when I was 16. So I feel that I am more a child of the Marshall McLuhan world that he imagined. And I don't mean to be critical, but I explore a lot of new composers and composers, and I'm often struck about how they're hammering on the same thing. Like, I get it. You're combining this aspect of Steve Reich's music with this kind of orchestration from Steve. I mean, I like it, but by the second piece, I find myself getting irritated, and the third piece that's working the same formula, I'm out. I do think whatever music education is, I'm not sure that I didn't get it. I mean, formal, university music degrees. My degrees are in liberal arts. But I do think music education should be like literally. You spend a semester in Indian music, tapping those rhythms and looking at those pitches, and then next semester you do only Bach and counterpoint. I mean, strict, complex counterpoint. We'll even throw in one of the modern masters. Like, I think Schönberg's a modern master of counterpoint, and y'all just suffer. And you'll want to dance to the raga again. The next semester you should have to, we'll just skip over bebop because that becomes a lifetime study. You just play free jazz. Even if you have rudimentary skills on piano or voice, everyone can say, you're going to be thrown with some jazz musicians, and you're going to walk that line for a while. I really think this, for me, is music education. As I grew up, when I was 16, I started playing professionally. I was playing in country bands. I was playing in lounge bands, often bass guitar, piano trio. I love playing bass, too. And sometimes guitar, and our lounge act with a singer. And, yeah, sure, rock bands. And I loved it all. I was in Vancouver. I was hanging out with Asian friends and getting into their homes and playing their instruments. And now I live in a French culture, and of course I've been to Europe a lot now and other places, and I get the idea of a singular identity of a culture and how people hang on to that. And I suppose with this virus now there'll be even more of that. But I've always been fascinated with everything. Whether I'm a great swing bass player, I can really do all those tempo changes accurately in gamelan music is neither here nor there. I experience them, and I just feel I'm recombining them in my own way.
So was gamelan your first encounter with microtonality?
No, but I would like, because I do often, I'm not a musicologist, and I'm not, like I say, I don't have a music degree, but I had the advantage of playing music with a lot of different people. And no, I would say actually more Indian music. There was a larger Indian population. To answer your question, the Southeast Asian population came a bit later to Vancouver, but the gamelan thing was always there. The university I went to, at first they didn't have a music department. They had a full gamelan orchestra, which I recorded all the time and used in my pieces, but it was just a gift from the Indonesian government for I can't remember why. But anyways, give our students a break on tuition. I don't know. It's great music. I love it. It's just wow. I mean, where do you begin? First of all, it's just the instrumentation, the whole idea of all metallic instruments. So that we're right off the top excites me. Inharmonicity, and we actually haven't talked about that. It's orchestration and tuning, because one of the things that it seems, at least the last time I read anything written in the West about gamelan music and tuning in particular, is there's still this this doesn't quite make sense. First of all, their instruments are mainly all metallic, so why you're even trying to analyze this with ratios is totally screwed up to me, because none of those instruments are producing a harmonic series, so why even think that way? But what became more fascinating for me is I finally asked, one of the master guys that came to Vancouver so often to make sure we weren't turning, I guess the gamelan orchestra into a heavy metal guitar thing. Just joking. Anyways, and I asked him, so how do you think about tuning? And so I somehow put that in a way he could understand, and he corrected me like, we don't think like that. We're just interested in the beating. See, and then he hit two pieces of metal, two notes, as we call it. You see here how that goes, ying, 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 ying. And these two go, whoa, 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 whoa. And he said, we distinguish one gamelan orchestra from another Well, okay, I'm using our Western terms. By beating, I mean that is beating close intervals, right?
Yeah.
And so I thought to myself, well, holy shit, here's a culture that's evaluating each other's music rates of vibrato or tremolo. I mean, so then you kind of go, wow, this is beautiful. I mean, I had to think about that for a while. It made me much more aware of vibrato, by the way, even in Western practice. But no, I would say actually, I just was Chinese and Indian music was more my first sense of different tuning, and blues guitar, I mean, and that was my start. But it was a long way before I was, composing.
Neat. That's really cool. And how are you influenced by spectralist composers, or are you? It seems like your spectralism is uniquely, it's almost like maybe in Vales and in Levresse, you have a situation where you create these big, awesome, dissonant clouds of chords. It's all spread out, but then when you change to another spectral chord, even though you have that same effect going on, things sound different enough that, we've moved on to this new entity.
Well, I suppose spectral composers did, which we were doing on the West Coast and in other places everywhere, in electroacoustic music, is we would take a multiphonic or another unique sound, a gong or something, and analyze it. Now, what the spectralists did is they got literal about it, like Crusade and all these people, they take a soft tam gong or a multiphonic, and they write out all the partials, in that case, they're not harmonic, partials, for the chamber orchestra or for whatever the commission is. The thing is, there's a skip there in my mind, because each of those, now I'm being specifically critical of the methodology, is there's a skip, because this sound I'm hearing, I like some of their music, to answer your question, but I don't think it's quite what the input does not match output. Not that that's important. If they can create a great narrative and a great dream, which in the best of their works they can, but there's a lot of misery along the way, I find, because people are being programmatic about it. They take their multiphonic or whatever, and they write out all the partials for 5 or 6 different instruments in our normal instrumentation, flutes, winds, reeds, strings. But each of those instruments is producing a harmonic series, which, weirdly enough, the harmonic series on a string is different than a reed, and a saxophone harmonic series is different than a clarinet harmonic series. And it's kind of like this fundamental tracking, is what it's called, psychoacoustics, where they're only looking at individual partials, having them played on instruments of varying degrees of accuracy and richness of pure harmonic series, and you start with mean harmonic. No, I do not hear the multiphonic in this chord. No, I do not hear the tam in this chord. If it's a great harmony, wonderful. But please don't tell me this is a sound of a tam orchestrated. I mean, that is I'm going to have to smoke so much pot before I ever hear that connection. I mean, so I think their methodology, I think the idea of analyzing the micro level of sound to see new behavior, because I am so tired of hearing about the harmonic series, and just frankly, that's just all my life. Yeah, there are these, and the gamelan, you were just mentioning the gamelan, except for the, I can't remember the name of the instrument, but it's called a bamboo flute, and even the way they play in gamelan music, they play it with so much growling, it's like they're trying to disturb its harmonic series. None of those instruments produce a harmonic series, but they harmonize together, and they create music, and there's other examples. So it's there's these spectrums, and what are they? And for years, in my work in the 80s, you mentioned Vales, but there's works after that, like in The Natural Doorway, I crouch and caught in an octagon of unaccustomed light, where I'm, especially in The Natural Doorway, I crouch on this particular point, I am doing basically spectral composition, and I'm taking harmonics, I'm taking a harmonic series, and then I'm slowly introducing having those instruments play the spectrum of inharmonic, multiphonic, and so there's this disturbance of the harmonic series. But a lot of that work showed me, because I was using a lot of pluck strings in that, is there's already a lot of inharmonicity in many instruments, especially anything struck, plucked, or blown hard. That's part of the liveliness of the sound, is the level of inharmonicity. Piano, to me, is just one of the most potentially percussive. Yes, I love Chopin. It's all that interpretation. And when I go for a massage, I am usually forced to hear the most sentimental version of piano music. But, when you really get hammering, there's a lot of contemporary music, you really get hammering on the piano, especially in the low end. It's just like, it sounds like a metal factory. So, there's so many things going on. I think conceptually, I agree with spectral morphology with spectral composers. I mean, anything is a blessed relief. That's a methodology after that horrible 12-tone second Viennese and the post-serialists and all that Ferneyhough music. Oh, God, where they literally have a computer program and compute their rhythms because they can't even create them and no one can feel them. That's, to me, just like, oh my God, how lost in the head are we? But at least what I love about the spectral composers is they're trying to base their music in a reality that already exists, an acoustic reality, the only one we know. And, the artistic success varies, from now I'm starting to find a lot of people are, I guess because it's being taught. When I was doing Veils in the Natural, I had like one Grisset recording, no scores. I read an article or two and realized we were working in similar directions. Kaija Sahu, the Finnish composer, is, of course, another really seminal figure in that era. Actually, I like her music a lot, though along the way, I hope I produce something like some of the spectral pieces that are interesting for what they sound like anyways. But they are, let's just say, my conceptual idea for this harmonic to inharmonic and back and forth never quite sounded like when you hit a middle C on flute, and then the person on the tubular bell plays middle C. Like, how come I don't get that? I'm just talking a singular sound. All the points in between, right? And combining. But, well, that's all we ever do in the arts is try, hey?
Is that something you're potentially interested in doing a lot more in future works, or have you already been doing it like in Veils, the harmonic, inharmonic?
No, because like I just said, I went down that mine shaft for 20 years, and I found a few nuggets, but I sure had to do a lot of digging. And you asked me about the spectralist. That's where I kind of wonder. Also, I think in music it becomes a problem when theory meets practice. This is not science. This is about, artists create things. And then the theory, what started happening in the 20th century is, in many ways, theory started outstripping practice, that we felt our ears needed to adjust. I mean, I'm sure the audience that still patiently sit through Weber and whatnot, no, we're eventually going to hear the tone roll. Well, you're a better person than me. I've given up. And on this spectral thing, after 20 years of being down that mine shaft of research and development, I guess I've given up. I don't know if we're ever going to hear it the way that we think of it. I think right now, although I'm contradicting myself, is we need another theoretical leap in the way we think of sound. I think we're still post-Fourier analysis, like even like everything I just described, harmonic, inharmonic. I think there's a lot more going on in sound. And I think there's even more going on once sound is put into practice. That means once people are playing, and that's why I record, is because you have a line, but a musician brings it to life. Just like there's words on a paper, but only a poet.
Maybe years and years from now in the distant future, how maybe, if anyone remembers us at all, as composers, how they'll be analyzing our patterns and maybe come up with a theory that's That's in the times. I feel like now we're finally in the music education system. I do feel like the music theory that they teach is of another time. I mean, it's an important time, and I feel that it's very formative in Western musical tradition, but it's not representative of what's really going on. I wonder if music theory, as it was taught back in, like, maybe like the 17th century, was as behind as what's getting taught today. I guess it seems like music is just behind to me, but I know that there's also large groups of people who are quite aware of this system's failing to teach anything outside of Western music from the Common Practice period. It's like often, I don't know if you like go on the internet and see like meme groups a lot, but people mock it like all the time. It's like it's in the young collective consciousness that the music theory that we have to learn is ridiculously outdated, looking back on it from a contemporary perspective.
I should say my first university degree was in history, so perhaps often I all of a sudden keep talking about medieval or Bach or this or that. It's like, what the hell? But it was not in music history, it was in regular history. I haven't done as much music history as I should for being a full-time composer, but I was too busy after my education to write music. But I still read part-time, but now it's mainly non-Western. But I will say one thing. The amount that I have read about all the, quote, great composers is they were all practicing their craft by age 16, 18 tops. I do not understand the protracted education system we have for music in which you finish your PhD almost at age 30 and go straight into a teaching job. Sorry, when in this picture were you a composer exactly? That's part of the problem, is I think most brains, music and physics are often put together. I hate to say it's a horrible, horrible thing, and damning of people, but usually your brilliant insights, that moment, that Einstein moment, whatever, aha moment, eureka moment, whatever the hell you want to call it, Stravinsky writing The Rite of Spring at age 26, happens in your 20s. I was actually surprised reading my intro to the Untempered Orchestra. I thought, well, geez, I thought I had left everything behind, my way of thinking in Wales. And there was things, but all of a sudden there I am talking about the basal membrane. I thought, okay, in a new way, I'm talking about it in terms of diatonic theory now. It doesn't matter. But my point is, I think I had a lot of my real aha moments in my 20s and 30s, and I'm spending the rest of my life essentially polishing that turd, as they say. And I think there is the reverse model where somebody is a late bloomer. It's quite rare. So the idea that almost everyone is in music education until well into their 20s, like through a PhD. When I started, having a PhD in composition was very rare. Now it's like, they don't even open you're not even allowed in unless you have a PhD, so to speak. It's stock.
Yeah.
Also, I do think there's another historical problem, is that in music you have to start young and you should be in practice by your late teens, early 20s tops. Yes, but there is also another thing, and this is throughout academia, and that is the good news for Bach or Haydn or Vivaldi or whoever you want to talk about. We'll just talk about Western music because it's easier. We all know it unless you're listening. I won't trip off into Indian music or stuff. Is the good thing about those composers is they weren't responsible for other people's music. And when Beethoven did a concert, it was all Beethoven music, or Bach did his concert. He didn't have to play his teacher's music, or how about this little motet written 100 years ago? He didn't even know about it, or very, very little. But he did not have an intellectual, artistic responsibility to know about it deeply musically. He just had to create music to eat for his time. And that's a real difference, because if you look at the training of a musician now, let's say in composition, and it's all secondhand to me, what they've told me. I know this, when I was younger, he's going in to write his exam on the Beethoven piano sonatas, which, are great. I love the last two, but why are you writing an exam on that? You're supposed to be a contemporary composer. I mean, I love Beethoven. I'm always torn. It's kind of like I wish I had the time to sit around through a whole semester of analyzing Beethoven piano sonatas, but I don't, and I never will. I mean, like, holy shit. Beethoven didn't spend all his day analyzing Bach's organ ditties, I mean, he just got on with writing 32 sonatas. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, definitely. That's a situation we're in now where we have to... we're at a point where we're very, very historically aware, so we have to know more about it, and that causes people to do a lot of things that aren't just making music if they're composers. And then there's also the idea that music is, I guess, less economically valuable for people today, for many reasons. Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Absolutely.
You mentioned that you were a full-time composer. Would you?
Yes, yeah.
Would you want to explain a little bit about what that means and, what your daily work is like and how you come across new opportunities and things like that?
Well, I should say, I mean, I don't even know if most of your listenership is American, or I presume a certain amount. So for the international crowd, especially Europeans, they can just snooze off now. Basically, we have this thing called arts funding, and it's very generous, and you apply for a grant for a year. You say, I want to do this work. I would do that, like for Libra. I say, okay, this year I'm going to spend 4 months writing the piece, writing out the parts, and then I come back a year later and say, okay, I'm halfway through recording. I need another year to record the second half, to mix the thing, because I'm dying here. I've been in the same 15 minutes of music for 2 years, and if you don't give me this grant on top of the insanity I'm going through, no, just kidding. And, or you have, so there's those kind of grants, production grants, or creative grants, and then there's commissions. So let's say whoever we refer to, David Brody, wants to commission me, or Phoenix, and of course lots of others. I've had about 30 or 40 commissions. They apply on my behalf to my government, and I get money, or they pay me directly. So yes, and then also, if you haven't given up your American citizenship yet, it goes on.
Well, almost everything that I've ever had to try and fight for, recognition-wise, has been based on... It just feels like I'm trying to convince people to like my music who should already like it based on principle, but who might not for some reason, or who just haven't, hunted it down yet. That's where I find myself now. And in academia, there just wasn't even, there wasn't even that dynamic. Nobody was telling me how to make income as a composer, because I guess it's really, really hard to do without just going into academia. It seems like going into academia would be the easy way, because you just have this track that you go along, right? But then the fact that it's so competitive and it has that allure of being an easy path means that everything is oversaturated, and the way that people pick candidates is probably more based on what everyone is thinking in the local community. It's based on whatever values they've set up for themselves, instead of trying to, bring in people who are thinking big, maybe.
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, the university is clearly its own world, its own universe, its own system. But I would never maintain that, a good composer is a good teacher, and vice versa. I think being a good teacher is its own quality. I'm not saying that's how they're hiring based on your teaching abilities. I think from what I gather, it's getting better. They're starting to look at how students have reviewed you and whatnot. Just, it used to be like, oh, well, you've got a lot of performances and recognized in Europe, so we'll hire you. Now I think they're much more looking. They realize they're supplying a service. What's the point of practicing with a good composer if he's an arrogant asshole?
Right.
Or unhelpful, and I know a lot of artists are both in music and other forms, they're brilliant in their art form, but they're not very articulate. You know, teaching, you have to communicate ideas, and it's a real gift. I come from a family of a lot of teachers, and when you're good at it, when I taught, I had to think something. I said, have I ever used this word before? Does the student know what it is? You know, you just don't start rambling into a sentence about the spectral morphological behavior of Balinese music. They never heard of Balinese music. They never heard of spectral morphology, you know. So you know, there's a whole technique, you know.
I was wondering if you could give maybe 2 or 3 examples of how you used knowledge of psychoacoustics to inform your microtonal musical techniques. Because I know you were talking about it in the Untempered Orchestra, or maybe it was Vale's.
That's in general. That's just I think the one major area of perception, oral perception, that music has not taken seriously, and actually is psychoacoustics. And what is the actual mechanism of how the ear works and how we hear? It sort of landed in my lap because even before the, quote, spectral composers, the electroacoustic composers of the 60s and 70s started looking at psychoacoustics. I guess once you're stripped down to a room of tone generators, you have to we have to put reality back together. What is reality, by the way? So I thought it was expected of me to know about how the ear worked, and also I was interested. The only other place that it comes up for sure and always has, and of course, like I said, is audio engineering is probably my other love. Is at least engineers, the ones that used to have university degrees, know how to read music and whatnot, they always studied psychoacoustics too. It's really important. I mean, it solves all the problems that you have when you're young. And maybe I'll just rattle off and send all your young listeners off to psychoacoustic studies. Is, for example, why when I listen to my mix loud, it sounds good, but when I listen to it quietly, it sounds like or vice versa? The answer lies, well, in that case, in the Fletcher-Munson curves. So there's that aspect from monitoring and mixing. Historical acoustic music has not dealt at this level of sound. And of course, when I started working on mainframe computers generating sound, it came up again, you know, just even frequency modulation. Bezier, whatever those stupid things the FM synthesis is based on. I can't remember all that old stuff, but it's all, you know, psychoacoustics. So it's just as a general extra, you know, like I'm sure, Stephen, at this point we could rewrite the music curriculum. More world music, more psychoacoustics, more technology, more improvisation. I mean, we're hitting all the good topics for sure. And less Beethoven piano sonatas. For me, because microtuning, I guess the one that really, both in Vale's, and I also have a document for that, and in the Untempered Orchestra, but another thing that for me is the way the basilar membrane actually works. Like, how do we, once again, because remember my artistic intention is to produce large work, how does the brain, the perception, the human, break down the perception of large events? I mean, psychologists talk about Gestalt, musicians talk about orchestration. Well, there's also another aspect, and that is the basilar membrane, how the frequencies lie along the basilar membrane, which is the thing the hair's one way and move, it's 200 hertz. Okay, now this hair moves because it's 210 hertz. But then also the higher functioning next level, they're grouped together in what are called critical bands, and they're quite small by the top of the musical range, top of the piano range, like a whole tone. And that is, explains like the simple phenomenon of why when I play a major third in the center of the register, it sounds like a major third. When I play in the very lowest register, it can actually sound quite gritty and dissonant. And when I play in the very top register, it sounds very thin. And that is because in the middle of the register, it's in two critical bands. In the low end, it's in one. So, like one nerve ending's having to resolve two signals at once. I think when two tones are 50% apart in a critical band, they're most consonant and most dissonant. I just use my ear, quite frankly. But it's good to know that there's differences in registers. And within one basilar membrane, one critical bandwidth, there's how wide is that? So essentially you need wider intervals in the low end and smaller intervals in the top end. I said quick, dirty way out of that long explanation, which is what you find in tonal music. The bass player only plays octaves and fifths, right, and fourths, and the piccolo's like hammering away in almost a chromatic way, right? So we know this sound behavior, but it explains this, because then when you hit tuning, new tuning systems, it's like, ooh. I don't know quite how to answer. I read in the Untempered Orchestra how I dealt with it, because I sort of explained why I'm only working with 7. Just like we select these 7 tones from these 12 tones we call C major, and we select these 7 tones from the 12 and we call it E major, et cetera, et cetera. You understand all that? So it's the same idea, and it's 7 or it's 5, and even in Indonesian music, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to respect human nature, and I guess also what psychoacoustics teaches. Oh, yeah, and that's where I, as a young man, started getting very irritated with a lot of contemporary composed music. It's like, well, no, the whole idea of 12 and even distribution of interval sizes throughout all the register, this is anti-human. Oh, right, it's European culture, post-Holocaust, they're all anti-human. Well, I'm not interested. Why do I want to listen to this? What? I'm forcing myself into a position where my foot is way off in the air in the left above my head, and my left arm is out in space in the right side of me. I can't do that. My ears can't do that. Does anybody really go, I really got to hear Weber's Opus 5? I don't know. I guess there's somewhere there is, but I think they probably go, I really need to hear Stevie Ray Vaughan, or I really need to hear Barrio Sequenza, or Symphonia, pieces like that, or a lot of Ligeti's pieces. Yeah, they're doing all the contemporary song and dance, like Eddie Barrio and Xenarchus, but they're respecting the ear in a way.
Right.
And you look at the scores, and you go, well, these guys, I don't think, studied their psychoacoustics, but I get why they're voicing this way and why they're using these instruments here. And when they don't do much microtonal, but when they do, it's for a certain sound and effect. Let's call it spectral, You say yes, I say no. You say spectral, I say orchestration, whatever. Let's call the whole thing off. And you go, well, that's what a composer's supposed to do, is respect your materials. And your materials are musical instruments, okay, more synthesizers, it's a whole other thing I won't talk about, because I don't really know anymore, and how the ear works, and the history of music, because whatever you create, everyone coming to it is going to go, I'm coming with this association. As soon as you talk about who has the biggest sound, as soon as you hear those drum kits and congas going, you have an expectation about what kind of music this is.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just going to use one music example. And then it's immediately thwarted when you hear this very formal church choir. The bass is coming in. la, you know, and then it goes into a flurry of sound. It's like, okay, where are we? What's going on? You don't hear, I mean, just a simple thing of a really high Afro-Cuban 2 drum kits and wall of hand percussion and a funky bass. All of a sudden, with a choir coming out of nowhere singing, you know, silly lines like "Who has the biggest sound?"
Yeah,
it's
great.
I mean, if they're there, they're doing some important poet or, you know, some biblical text or something important. You know, that not asking stupid questions about who has the prettiest melodies and like what is this, you know, and it goes on, and that one line. But I'm respecting the ear like that. That whole opening is I'm just going to talk about that because there's no score for that. In many ways, I really admire it because the top voices are starting. I think it starts at the bottom voice is at 60, and the top voice is at 240, and that whole opening into the drum break is they come together at 120, and it's all just intonation and C. It's all lines up. And it's really powerful. I mean, I played that on a lot of large sound systems. It just rips down the hall in a beautiful way. Where if the hall has any sort of icatones near C or G or D, even I'm impressed at the extra harmonics I'm getting. It's like, oh my God! And of course, hearing this thing that I used to do a lot, and I did there too, of half this overgrown orchestra is speeding up while half it's slowing down, and they're all like lining up, you know, like when it's 180, it's 90, and then when it's I can't remember, you know what I mean? Like they're all subdivisions, but they're constantly shifting.
So they're lining up when they hit at certain points, even though the tempos are constantly changing.
Yeah, they have their own behavior. One's just slowing down slowly. I mean, speeding up slowly. The other one's slowing down slowly. But they're lining up where they are in that trajectory. I mean, that's one thing we didn't talk about in this interview. I mean, that, you know, typical Western music theory. I'm not being critical. I love this interview. But, you know, we don't talk. I mean, that's so important to me is, well, you mentioned groove off the beginning, but is the skeleton of time is what I call it. Well, where do you place these notes? How do you place these notes? We talk about how do you play and what are you playing, microtonal or whatever. But then there's the whole, I mean, I love the idea of music expressing multiple time universes that are happening because in our post-Einstein world, we believe this is the world we live in. So why do I hear studio music still that's 12-tone equal ugly temperament at 120 and 4/4? Like, fuck you. I mean, give me a break. I mean, you can do anything with this tool. It's not restricted by musicianship. You know that.
It's almost like they have no sense of curiosity.
Yeah, it's like so obvious. And just even in composed music, I mean, you have this like, you know, complexity piled up of Varian. Well, no, not to pick on him. He's the most famous of that school. But there's so many other forms of complexity. But it involves thinking in a way that's beyond the score page, you know, because now everyone's trapped in their notation programs. Well, you can't do Dolden music in a notation program. I got 40 tempos, 20 tempos I want. Or I have, like what I just described, even just mere 2 tempos. But each one's changing independently, yet they're lining up. You know, like 180, you know, this starts at 60, the other one's at 240. Then this one, they move up to like 90 to 180, you know, et cetera, like all these in between. I'm not going to do all the math.
Right,
you know,
yeah.
And, you know, we can do this. But, I mean, and it creates, to me, a really beautiful sound. And it's all, you know, Afro-Cuban jazz. You know, a million music wankers in between in their ears, and they forget about Paul Dolden and his crickets.
Yeah. All right, so, yeah, everyone, this is Paul Dolden. We've had a very in-depth interview with him, and he has a Bandcamp page that you should definitely all check out because the music is absolutely wild. And then he has Spotify, and then the website that his publisher had is www.electrocd.com. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And there's also the Starkland CD. Starkland is like STARKLAND. That's the name of the label. And that's you'll find that on Spotify and other servers. But that's the Who Has the Biggest Sound CD. And my other 4 CDs are on Prodigital. the www.electrocd.com. But if I could actually use just this moment to clarify the one, I knew this was going to happen in life, huge complication about my work. All my works between 1980 and 2002 were done, mixed, recorded on gear that is not very good. In 2000, I remastered everything, and it was republished by Empire Digital at the time, which consists of 3 CDs, 2 Lever CDs, and the original Threshold of Deafening Silence, which is now called Silent Silences in French. And then I went on and released some Tropic Twilights on a CD called Delirium of Pleasure on Empire Digital, the Pleasure. That work, in Tropic Twilights, everything up to 2008 before, in 2012, I remastered. Again, because the gear got better and I felt I understood the pieces better. Those 2012 remasters will be the works I am posting slowly on Bandcamp. Also on Bandcamp, I will be putting on works for instrument and tape that were never published. Outside of my Bandcamp page, once it gets full with all these 4 CDs, probably 2 CDs of music for instruments and tape, there are 2 CDs that will never be on Bandcamp. The first one is Who Had the Biggest Sound, the Untempered Orchestra, on Startling Records, which you can listen to on most streaming services and hear buy at Startling or elsewhere. It's everywhere. And the last CD I did, I went back to Empire Digital. It's a CD called Histoire de Histoire. History de History. Stories of Stories. And it has the major work on it, which is about 40 minutes long. It's called Music of Another Present Era. And there's a piece for electric guitar tape and trumpet tape. But anyway, that CD you can only hear and you can only buy it upon Digital for now, anyways, for the next few years. So that is my discography in a nutshell. As confused as it is by remastering, republishing, and I just, hope one day this all works. So that everyone's not listening to that, because people still write me listening to the mix from 1988. Oh my God! And I have it around. I put it on. What are you listening to? It sounds like the world's biggest AM radio in a car. It was the gear that, remember, that's the other thing. I mean, time is gear, good quality gear was expensive until recently. So, my first decent board I bought in '86 cost me $6,000. Now for $6,000 you can buy a computer and like plugins that I would have fallen all over myself for free or $10 each, But I don't know, it's great. I'm envious. I've only come into really good gear in the last few years, I feel. So, because of price.
Right.
Yeehaw, capitalism for once.
Yeah, I know, right?
Well, I think it's more just a lot of people making music, but whatever.
Yeah. All right, great. This is Paul Dolden, everybody.
Okay, I gotta go. My dog thinks I've died or something. She's in the house crying. So let's talk some other time. You edit that together, send it to me, and we'll move forward. There needs to be a new dog here there, okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I thank you so much for being on. Really appreciate your music. See you later.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Well, thank you, Steve. I look forward to it. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. Hey, listeners. Thanks for tuning in to the Microtonal podcast Now and Zen. Our August episodes feature Paul Dolden, Vivian Tylinska, and Margot Schulter. The Margot Schulter episode will be released as our monthly bonus episode on Patreon, so if you'd like to listen to that episode as well, please sign up for the Patreon account at the link in the show notes. Thank you for your support. We appreciate all the support of our xenharmonic patrons, as well as our xenharmonic gods: Adam Fries, Matthew Sheeran, Vincenzo Sicarella, Kit Duguay, Hector McGuffin, Christopher Bailey, Leland O. Weigel, Amy Coleman, Joe Weigel, Tina Harmon-Carteau, and the Brass Whisperer. Exciting news! Now and Zen has met the 30 patron goal. This is an exciting milestone for us. I, Stephen Weigel, have agreed to arrange another Easley Blackwood etude for keyboard with every 10 patrons I get. So next up is the 13-tone etude. Our eventual goal is 60 patrons by December 2020, or I will no longer be able to continue the podcast. Your support is appreciated more than ever during this difficult time. When you support the Now and Zen Patreon, you also get a look into any projects that I am working on, such as multi-instrumental covers of xenharmonic songs in their original tunings, resources for ear training, music theory, and composition. Catch you next time on Now and Zen.